Hey, welcome to another episode of Inspirational Focus with Deacon Terry Acox. Terry is a permanent Roman Catholic deacon who's going to be talking about the sacrament of marriage. So stay tuned. Hey, welcome to another episode of Inspirational Focus with host Deacon Terry Acox. He's a permanent Roman Catholic deacon who has been serving the different churches in southern Ohio, specifically in Scioto County. Today, he's going to continue his discussions about the different sacraments. There are 7 sacraments, and this sacrament he's going to be talking about is marriage. So again, welcome, Terry, and thank you very much for sharing wisdom about what marriage is.
I'm happy to be here.
So, first of all, there are 7 sacraments?
There are 7 sacraments. The sacraments of baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist are considered the 3 sacraments of initiation.
Initiation, okay.
Then there are sacraments of healing, which is anointing and reconciliation.
Okay.
That are the sacraments of healing. Then the sacraments of service, or those of holy orders and marriage.
And so marriage is one of those services,
Yes.
In the eyes of the Roman Catholic Church, a service to the goodness of God.
Well, like in holy orders, you provide a service, if you will, to the people that you're in charge of. Like a priest provides a service to the people of the parish by providing them with the sacraments of the various sacraments, celebrating masses and that type. In marriage, it's the husband and the wife that provide service to each other.
I see.
And that their focus is to get the other person, the other spouse, guided towards heaven.
I see. And then, of course, as the children come along in many families, etc., their service to those children.
Their service to the children. That is actually one of the goods of marriage, is the procreation and education of children.
I see. And so marriage, I think you have firsthand experience, as a permanent deacon. You had been married before you became a permanent deacon.
I was married before I became a permanent deacon. If I had become a deacon prior to being married, then I would not have been allowed to marry.
I see.
I have taken a vow of chastity.
Okay.
So that if my wife should predecease me, I cannot get remarried.
I see. And I know that your wife and you have enjoyed 47 plus years.
We have been married over 47 years.
Wow, that is fantastic. And I'm quite sure that both you and she see eye to eye on everything. No, but realistically, when you have 2 individuals come together, we still have our likes and dislikes.
Yes, we do. We all have our different idiosyncrasies. I like to do this, she likes to do that. So to a large degree, that's exactly what we do. I have my interests and she has her interests, and we go about doing what we like to do. Then if there's a conflict, then we sit down and discuss it and see where we go from here.
Right. And you were telling me before the broadcast, one of the things that's important in the marriage, I believe, was listening.
Communication in every walk of life is very important. You need to sit down and talk about things, talk about problems, talk about the good issues too.
That's true.
Good things and bad things happen to us all the time. And it's like when you pray, if you're having a difficult time in your life for whatever reason, you pray to God to help get you relief or help you solve that particular problem, you should also pray to God for thanks when something goes well in your life.
I see. Hey, and many times both men and women have such different outlooks on life, and it's interesting how when two individuals come together, it's amazing how much friction could happen, or how much love could happen.
Right.
And I guess it depends upon the moral structure, the moral fiber of individuals.
It does. No marriage is a perfect marriage. There will be difficulties, and it's how you handle those difficulties
that's true.
that really come out in a marriage.
I see. So why was the Roman Catholic Church interested in making marriage a sacrament?
Actually, it's primarily based upon Jesus speaking about marriage in the Bible. And in a couple of different locations, the Pharisees asked Jesus what he thought about divorce. And Moses, for example, had written that a man could divorce his wife by writing a letter of divorce. And Jesus tells the Pharisees that he did this only because of the hardness of your hearts.
I see.
That you did not try to solve your problems. You just said, we have a problem, I'm going to divorce you.
Well, isn't it also true that in the Old Testament eras, men and women were looked upon differently, and there were different cultures and traditions? Like for instance, you had mentioned earlier that in some older cultures, the Jewish faith, David had
many wives,
and that was accepted practice. Whereas in the New Testament or the beginning of Christ, there seems to be a melding of a better understanding what is between one man and one woman.
Yes. In answering the Pharisees, Jesus actually goes back to Genesis.
Oh, okay.
When in saying that when God created man and woman, he created them to be one. So when they become one in marriage, then I forgot. When they become one in marriage, then they leave their mother and their father, and they go on and live their life together.
I see.
That was supposed to be a permanent situation.
Well, and then in the Old Testament where they talk about divorce, it was under a different frame of understanding. Women, in my estimation, I could be totally wrong, but in my estimation, were considered.
They were almost considered property.
Property, yes, that's the word I wanted to say.
In the ancient times, they were almost considered property.
Yeah.
That a woman did not really have any rights of her own. She only had the rights that her husband or father would give her.
And that's rather interesting because we sort of carried that on in our historical era until about 1800s, 1900s, when it was felt that women did not have to be second-class citizen.
Well, you can see, if you study history, you can see that in the early part of, say, the 17th and 18th centuries, and even before that, you can see a gradual increase in how women were viewed.
Unfortunately, our society, because of a variety of different things, no longer accepts that in our at least in our nation, in our faith, Catholic Church faith, that both are equal.
Yes.
And that it took a while, but I think that's very important.
Yeah. The church looks at a man and a woman as being equal as far as human dignity and what they need as far as their salvation. They look at them also as complementary to each other.
That's a good point.
Well, because obviously no two people are exactly equal to each other.
Right.
But there is a complementarity between a man and a woman in marriage that allows them to form the family and.
Well, I think that's a very good point, especially when children come in. Children are to be loved and cherished, but children also, as young as they are and as old as they get, can be driving wedges to a marriage.
They can, but the mother and the father have to be cognizant of this. For example, a child may go to his mother or her mother and say, "Can I do this particular thing?" And the mother might say, "No, you can't do it." So then they go to the father and say, "Can I do this thing?"
Children would do that? Wow.
Yeah. But then, so in a case like that, that's where communication comes in.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
You don't want to have children driving that particular wedge between the mother and the father.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think it's very important. Earlier you were mentioning about marriage encounter, how it's an important service that both a husband and wife can get together and spend some time to regenerate that energy.
Yes. You go through a dating process and an engagement process. The purpose of this is to learn about your future spouse. And then once you get married to each other, then what you need to do then is occasionally get away by yourself so that you can learn more about your spouse, find out how he or she feels about certain things, and basically just get some time alone. Without the pressures of family.
Sure, yeah, and I think that's extremely important. Reflection is sitting down and looking at all the different things that your marriage has done. Fortunately, we men don't remember everything.
That is true.
And we sort of forget some of the
selective hearing, selective memory.
Yep. So in the sacrament, wasn't there some changes that were made in regards to the marriage sacrament itself?
Well, in the early days of the church, there was no specific rite of marriage.
Okay.
Marriage was usually done by the family, arranged by the family, and that pretty much was the practice until roughly the 12th century.
Oh, okay.
If a priest or a bishop was included in the marriage, it was only at the invitation of the family for them to come and bless the marriage.
I see.
Like I said, it was arranged by the family. There was no specific rite. And then in the 12th century, the rites began to become more standard and continued up until about the 16th century at the Council of Trent, where the council decided that this is going to be the rite. Marriage is a sacrament, and these steps are necessary in the rite of marriage.
That's interesting because during that restoration and during the understanding of the human nature and sciences and things of that nature, I think it was very important because the culture was changing.
The culture changes constantly.
Yep.
As we said earlier, in ancient times, women and children were treated primarily as property. There probably was some emotional love involved. But then you can see through the years how this society changed, and more of an equal existence slowly came about.
Right. Huh. And the Roman Catholic Church. I think at that time also King Henry VIII somewhere around there, felt that he could divorce one wife and marry another, and there was sort of a creation of a major schism between
what you're talking about there is actually part of the Reformation that was in Europe, and this is in particular was the English Reformation. King Henry VIII wanted to divorce his wife, so he petitions the Pope for an annulment, and the Pope basically said, no, you don't have grounds for an annulment in this particular case. So then King Henry VIII decides that he's going to make his own church. He's going to start the Church of England.
Okay.
And then at this point he says, well, now since I am the head of the church now, I can divorce my wife.
Okay. So I guess the only way you can divorce is never mind, I won't go there.
Actually, while it's not recommended, I would guess you would say, there's no sin in divorcing your wife or your husband.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. You know, you mentioned divorce and you mentioned annulment.
Okay, there's actually no sin in divorcing your wife. If you divorce your wife due to, say, habitual infidelity or abuse or habitual alcoholism or something major like this.
That's disrupting the family.
That's disrupting the family and causing some difficulty in the family. But the thing is, you're still married. While you may be legally divorced, the church considers you as still married.
I see. So in the eyes of God.
So in the eyes of God, you're still married.
I see. And so you mentioned annulment. And so divorce is where you're legally
divorced, separate. The marriage does not legally exist.
I see. And so what is annulment?
An annulment is a process that the church has which states that the original marriage, once you have witness statements and so forth, that the original marriage was or was not a valid marriage.
I see.
You were still married, but the marriage may or may not have been valid.
Oh, that's interesting. So give me a for instance. I've been married to my great wife Wanda for 45 years. But let's just suppose one morning I wake up and I want to get an annulment.
Well, first of all, you can't get an annulment unless you're divorced.
Oh, okay. All right.
I mean, why would you want to determine whether or not your marriage was invalid if you're still married to her?
All right. Okay. Well, that makes sense. So let's just suppose I decided to get a divorce, and then I would go for an annulment.
If you wanted to remarry at some point in time, that would be the thing to do.
Okay, so let's just suppose I decide I want to get remarried. What is the process of the annulment?
Well, the process of annulment involves filling out a questionnaire. You have to describe what happened during your dating process, during your engagement, what type of relationship you had with your, at that time, future spouse, and then you have to describe the relationship you had with your spouse after you were married. For example, let's say you dated for 5 years before you were married.
Okay.
So during this time, you learn about your spouse.
Okay.
You then propose to her.
Okay.
And you become a little closer together during the engagement process, spending more time with each other. Spending more time with each other, learning a little more intimate details about your spouse's likes, dislikes, what he or she wants to do.
Okay.
And then you're engaged, say, for 18 months, year and a
Okay.
half, which is a reasonable time
Yeah,
period.
yeah.
Then you get married, and if you're married and then some difficulty arrives,
Okay.
let's say one of the parties starts drinking
Oh, okay. All right.
for whatever reason, then you have to try and work it out. You
Yeah, I would
cannot
hope so,
say
yeah.
you're drinking too much, I'm leaving you.
Okay.
You have to try and work it out with your spouse, seek counseling or whatever. And so you have to describe your relationship as it
I see.
moves from dating to engagement
I see.
to marriage.
Hey, and there they can sort of, and I'm assuming there's a tribunal court or
There is a tribunal. Each diocese has a tribunal which evaluates
I see. I see.
what goes on. They'll not only take your statements that you have to fill out, they need statements from your
I see.
spouse,
I see.
your former spouse, and they also want statements from probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 witnesses
Oh, wow.
who knew you, preferably who knew you during the marriage, during the dating process, through all these different phases.
And so, if individuals are needing annulment, probably it sounds like the very first thing they need to do is they need to talk with the Catholic priest
They need to talk with the priest. Yes.
and really sit down and look at what their options are.
Right.
Just out of curiosity, marriage is a contract.
Prior to Vatican II, that was kind of the general view.
And a contract is an open end, or it's.
It has a beginning and it has an end.
I see. I see.
Right. For example, you and I make a contract that I will provide you a certain service.
Okay.
In return for that service, you pay me some money.
Okay.
All right. Once the terms of that contract are fulfilled,
I see.
then the contract ends.
Okay. So I can see that that's a major problem.
Yes.
Than in marriages.
That would be a problem. But since Vatican II, the church has looked at a marriage as a covenant. God has made covenants with his chosen people down through
I
the
see.
ages. Actually, the first covenant was made with Adam and Eve, then one with Abraham, and so forth down through the ages. And in each case, it was the people, the chosen people, who broke the covenant by sinning or
see.
doing whatever.
I see. So it's.
God never broke the covenant.
Oh, okay. All right. So a covenant is on the spiritual end, where the joining of two individuals for a lifetime.
For a lifetime. A covenant does not have an end.
Oh, okay. All right.
Right? It goes on forever.
Okay.
Then when you and your wife or your husband get married, all right, you have made a covenant with each other.
I see.
As part of the consent to marry, which is part of the wedding ceremony, I, Terry, take you, Monica, to be my wife. I promise to be true to you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. I will love you and honor you all the days of my life.
Okay.
All the days of my life.
At the end, at death, does the Roman Catholic Church look at that covenant as?
The covenant ends at death of one of the two spouses.
Okay. All right. Well, that's rather interesting, because I know that one of the parables, Jesus was talking with, or asked, I can't specifically say, you would know better, but a woman said that she had
7 husbands.
7 husbands.
Okay.
And he responded, no, that's you only have one.
Yeah, basically Jesus said that, the woman described that she had had 7 husbands, and each one had given her a bill of divorce according to the Jewish custom.
I see.
And the man she was living with at that time was not her husband.
Oh, okay.
That is part of the reason, along with his teachings to the Pharisees on divorce, and actually the wedding feast at Cana.
I see.
But that this gets worked into the fact that the woman was basically only legitimately married to her first husband.
I see.
And everything after that was not a... If you're looking at it from a modern Catholic perspective, they would not have been a marriage.
Right. And again, culture gets mixed up in the belief structure. For instance, if we read some of the Old Testament, we can see where there were some violent times.
Oh, yes.
And perhaps we should give second thought before we say, well, it was in the Old Testament. We can apply that today.
Everything in the Old Testament actually points towards the salvation that Christ brought with him.
Oh, okay.
And all he gave to mankind. That's what the whole Testament leads up to. And it's important in that you have to look at these parts of the Old Testament to get to that.
Yeah. Well, perhaps in another, after we get through the sacraments, you can talk a little bit about, the Catholic Church in its Mass has 3 different readings. One is a reading of the Old Testament. The second reading is about the apostles.
Usually from the New Testament readings.
And then one of the Gospels.
One of the Gospels, yes.
And many individuals don't realize that a lot of the faith is based on the Word
of the Old Testament. A lot of our faith is actually based on Jewish practice.
Right. I understand.
From the Old Testament.
I understand. We only have about a minute. What can you leave the audience with about marriage? What are a few words of wisdom about marriage?
I don't know if I could actually give words of wisdom about marriage to anybody, because every marriage is different.
Right.
Every person is different. Every marriage is different.
That's true. Okay.
But in order to maintain a happy marriage, then you need to constantly be in communication with your spouse.
That's a good point. Very good point.
So when problems do arise, then you can say, let's sit down, work this out. All right. It's the same, it takes 2 people to get a divorce, the same as it takes 2 people to get a marriage, work a marriage together. No, I cannot do it by myself. My wife cannot do it by herself. It takes both of us to sit down, work together, and work out our problems that arise and make the marriage work. We cannot do it alone.
That's true.
And even my wife and myself, we cannot do it alone. We need God's help.
I understand.
So prayer is an important part of marriage.
That's a good point. Hey, we're talking with Deacon Terry Acox. He's a permanent deacon with the Roman Catholic faith, and he's talking about sacraments. Terry, I always look forward to our inspirational focus, and looking forward to talking with you again.
All right.
Thank you. I'm Patrick Dengel, Deacon Terry Acox. Have a great week.